Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Brian Campbell. I want to take a few minutes to tell you about using prayer in counseling. As you know, I'm a Christian counselor. I've been doing this for 25 years, and I want to just talk to you a little bit about my take on prayer in counseling. Of course, to begin with, I want to tell you I do use prayer in counseling, but not with everyone and not all the time. So how do I determine whether I'm going to use prayer in counseling or not? Well, first of all, I use silent prayer, regardless of whether we're using out loud prayer or audible prayer. But I get to know the person usually before I introduce prayer. I have information from the background information and the history, and I have a little form called Christian Beliefs and Experiences, and in that it asks about prayer. So I get an idea of whether the person's used to praying and his or her background in Christianity, whether they were raised with prayer, etc. So that gives me a good starting point to know whether or not they're going to be open to that. I don't have this as a checklist in my introductory materials to the client when they come in regarding confidentiality, etc. I don't actually put that into a form, although some Christian counselors do. I usually wait and just see whether or not I'm going to introduce Christian counseling by using my clinical skills and judging whether or not that's appropriate and judging whether or not the person would be open to that. That doesn't mean I don't do silent prayer a lot, but I'm talking about out loud prayer. So what about silent prayer, and what about preparing for counseling? Well, I want to tell you it's very important to get ready to counsel before you get into the situation of counseling. In the morning, I think it's especially important to get up, establish a routine of reading the Bible, praying and meditating, and getting what I call plugged in to God. You really have to have that attitude of prayer as you come in to do counseling. That doesn't mean that I'm not confrontive at times, but I do that out of love, and I think that people can see how much I love them and try to help them, and they'll see hopefully God's love through me as I do that. So I'm praying a lot before I come in. Believe me, the first client can be someone who wants to kill themselves or be suicidal, so you need to be very close to God when you're doing Christian counseling. I've also had clients like drop onto the ground and roll up in a little ball, and really look it's very disturbing sometimes, and hopefully you won't get situations like that, but you want to be close to God when you're doing counseling. So I plug in the morning, and I use silent prayer a lot. I pray before the client comes in. I'm certainly in an attitude of prayer the whole time that the client is here, and even when I'm home I'll find myself praying for clients. So it's something you really need to get into and do a lot. I mean, personally, I think it's very important to be connected to God, because it's God working through you, and you can't do that if you're using your little pea brains to try to make all the decisions, when in fact we need to sometimes defer to the Creator of the universe and just not say anything and let God work and talk through us. And I've certainly had some very interesting days sometimes, like it's like God says, this is the theme, and it might be forgiveness, and I'm telling you, almost every client that comes in, the issue is forgiveness. And when I'm speaking sometimes, I'm often just listening to myself, because I'm listening to God speaking through me, and that's pretty exciting. So anyway, get in that attitude of prayer and get God on your side. Just have Him right next to you when you're doing the counseling. It'll help a lot. I rarely pray the first session, as I said, and I usually don't pray at the beginning of a session, because I don't know what the person has brought into the session, whether they've had a bad time, whether sometimes I come in and a couple is sitting in the waiting room extremely mad. I mean, I'm not going to come in and start praying at that point in time. I deal with the issues, and then maybe, depending on what happens in the counseling session, I might pray at the end. I mainly pray at the end of sessions because of that discomfort with not knowing what's happening, so I typically pray. Now, I always ask whether or not the person it would be okay for me to pray, except people I've seen routinely, and they're anticipating and looking for me to pray at the end of the session. In fact, they would probably think it was very strange if I didn't pray. Some evangelicals want to pray at the very beginning and have God in presence and feel that indwelling of God in present while we are doing the session. I'm fine with that. Some people want to, usually I'm doing the praying, but sometimes the clients will ask to pray as well, and I'm certainly okay with that. I do have a couple clients who seem to go overboard sometimes with the prayer, and like long prayers, so I have to terminate sessions early so I give time for them to pray, but I'm comfortable with that. But I do much less. It's pretty rare that I have the client praying. I'm usually praying. Sometimes at the end of the session I use it as an opportunity to call on God to help us through the week, to get through learning more about what we need to learn and to help us and give us insights and inspiration from him, as I often give assignments for them to read and things to do during the session. So we certainly call on God there. Times when I don't use prayer, like if I'm dealing with issues that have little to do with spirituality, for example, if I'm dealing with behavior modification issues, like someone can't get their child to sleep through the night, or someone's child is having temper tantrums and I'm doing strict behavior modification, I typically don't pray then, unless it's a Christian family who wants me to pray, and I will certainly do that. So there are many situations like that I don't pray. I very rarely pray with people who are extremely severely disturbed, because you don't really know how that's going to work out. I don't pray with people, typically with people who are schizophrenic or have dissociative disorder or paranoid delusional disorder. There's a lot of disorders that you have to be very cautious about, because the person can react in a very unusual or strange way to prayer, and it just may trigger some things in their lives that you have to be very cautious about. So that would be something you want to be very cautious about with certain types of clients. Sometimes I give prayers, therapeutic prayers. You'll see some on my internet site, and they're just directed at people, for example, with anxiety or depression, and I've used my own clinical intuition to help them connect to God through these prayers. Overall, I think it's important to help the client develop a discipline of prayer in his or her life if they're not used to doing that. Of course, you have to watch the timing on that and decide whether or not that's something that you want to encourage the client to do at a particular point in time. But I think overall we want to get them to develop a prayer life. And there are some really good books on prayer, and I think personally that if you use like these 365-day calendar ones where you have a prayer each day, or at least a study each day with a small prayer with it, that's the best way, because people these days have difficulty doing things that involve a lot of work, but if we can get them reading something each day, that's really good. One of my favorites is My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. That's a really good daily devotional for couples. There's one called Moments for Couples by Dennis Rainey, and that's for couples. And on my internet site, if you go into the library under prayer, you'll see lots of different prayers there, lots of different books there that could be useful for helping someone to develop a discipline of prayer in their lives. I also have a book chapter on prayer and godly counsel. I'd suggest you look at that. You can find that on the internet site under scriptures and then under prayer, and have a look at that chapter. That's very often very useful also, just to understand the basics of prayer. So, I do pray. I pray a lot. It's not something that it's always overt or out loud prayer, but I do have a lot of silent prayers as I go through my day. And believe me, you want to stay connected to God because you're going to need Him on your side. God bless.